Good morning, everyone. I have one question for you. Have you ever torn your rotator cuff? Well, I have. But before we get into that, because it gets a little more complicated than that, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Riley Harris. I'm currently a student at Tarleton State University. I also am on the Tarleton State University rodeo team. Before coming to Tarleton, I graduated from Cisco Junior College, where I was also on the rodeo team, and I also qualified for the College National Finals Rodeo. From Cisco, I received an associate's degree, and now I'm at Tarleton. Aside from being a student, I am a professional bull rider. I ride in the NIRA, which is the National Intercollegiate Rodeo Association, as well as the PRCA, which is the Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association. Now, as I hinted at before, I'm talking about rotator cuffs. Today, in this video, I want to go over an injury that I recently sustained, and to talk about it, I want to talk about leading up to that injury, I want to talk about the injury itself, and then I want to talk about the recovery process. Now, like I said, I tore my rotator cuff. However, it gets more complicated than that because I've torn my rotator cuff, I have bone fragments from my humerus, I have nerve damage in my deltoid, and I also have a torn labrum on the other side. Not other shoulder, just other side. It's where the labrum is located. But either way. So, to get a better grasp of this, I want to show you guys the video of the injury itself happening. So let's scoot y'all right over here to the monitor. Focus that in. Alright, this is in San Angelo, Texas at the PRCA Rodeo. Bull's name is White Walker from Pete Carper Rodeo. Now, that all happens pretty fast. We're going to run it back, and I'm going to kind of talk you through it and tell you what's going on. As you can see, I have my right hand down, my left arm in the air. When that bull comes out of here, he's going to spin towards my left arm. That's called spinning away from my hand. I go off in the well, and if you'll see there, I reached over his neck. That is not a good thing to do when you're riding bulls. It's just a natural thing. It's self-preservation kicks in. So let's jump over here to some screenshots, and let's talk about what was actually going on. Now, like I said, there as you can see, my arm reached over the bull's head. My back is turned to you. And as we jump to this next screenshot, you can see it's a little blurry, but the bull's picked his head up, and now my arm is straight. So it's went from going at a 90-degree angle to coming straight up, just from the bull lifting his head up. Well, as I said before, that bull's spinning to the left, coming in this direction. So, with my arm being over his head, it's got nowhere to go but over the top of my head and behind me. And that's where the dislocation occurred. Now, let's go to a picture. Before we show the next video, I just want to show you the picture. Okay, now here is, like I said, there's 4 parts to the rotator cuff, which we'll go over in a little bit. But the supraspinatus is the one that I injured. And that's that red. This is the red one coming right over the top of here. Runs right underneath your clavicle here, was what we call the collarbone. Here's your clavicle, what we call the collarbone. And it runs right between there. Here's your AC joint. Runs right through here, and it connects to the top of the humerus, right there on the humeral head. Now that we got a good idea, we'll come back to that video here in a minute. Excuse me. As I said, there's 4 parts to the rotator cuff. There's, like we talked about, the supraspinatus. That's the one that I messed up. And then there's another one that runs directly under your pec muscle that connects to the front of the humeral head. And there are 2 that run underneath your scapula, which is what we call your shoulder blade, on the back that connect to the back of the humeral head. And these are all pretty much the muscle and the movement, all the rotation, which is in your rotator cuff, is necessary to have full shoulder mobility. Now, like I also said before, I didn't just mess up my rotator cuff. I've torn my labrum, and then the bone chips actually in my humerus is what makes my rotator cuff tear extremely complicated, because the part of the bone that broke off is where my rotator cuff is actually supposed to attach. So that's going to make surgery a little bit complicated than that. I also have nerve damage outside of my deltoid, which is really restricting movement. And then the labrum Make sure I got them all. Okay, I think that's it. There's bone chips, nerve damage, torn rotator cuff, and then torn labrum. Also, where the rotator cuff is broke off, that's not the tear. If you'll go back about 2 centimeters, there's a 80 to 90% tear, give or take, rough estimate, but 80 or 90% torn across. There's only 10% of it left holding on. So that's what we're really kind of worried about at the moment. Now I want to jump back to this video to pretty much show you what it's going to take to fix my rotator cuff. Just a simple surgery, or this in simple form, I guess you'd say. Ain't nothing about surgery, simple. So we're going to roll this video. I muted this so I can kind of walk you through it. Now here's the rotator cuff. As you can see, it's to detach. I won't need this. So all they're doing out there is trimming the scapula. Whoever this surgery is replicated from, the reason the rotator cuff torn, scapula is putting pressure on it. Mine is not the case. Obviously, I showed you the video of why mine was torn. But either way, like I said, there's the rotator cuff, the supraspinatus that I messed up. Here are actually the 2 rotator cuff tendons that connect to the back of the scapula, or back of the humerus head that run underneath your scapula. Let's roll this forward just a bit. Now this next part they trim up. This will have to be done for me, depending on what's done with those bone chips that the rotator cuff attaches to. But they're going to grind it down a little bit and make a good level playing field for the rotator cuff to heal to. After this, the anchor should come in right here. Alright, so you see the anchors going in. There'll be some thread-like materials come out. The number of anchors you use, that's simply totally depending on the strength needed. Sometimes you can use 2, sometimes you need 7. You know, there's no set number to a correct number of anchors. Now if you look, they're running those threads through the rotator cuff. Go fast forward this just a little bit. Then you suck it down, get it tight, tie the strings, cut them off, and then your rotator cuff is good and attached and ready to start the healing process. So now we talked about the injury and how it happened, we need to go over the recovery. And the recovery is, well, it starts at surgery, and right after surgery, you'll be put in a sling for 6 weeks. 6 weeks I'll be put in a sling. Then as soon as the sling period is done, I'll begin physical therapy, and generally a rotator cuff tear takes 4 to 6 months to heal. Now with the complications around it, we're still hoping for 4 to 6 months. But with everything else, because I looked up the times on them, a rotator cuff is supposed to take 4 to 6 months to heal and to be back to 100%. The bone chips, we've all broken a bone. That's 6 weeks. It's been that way since as long as I can remember. Broken bone, 6 weeks. So the breaks in the top of my humeral head here are going to take about 6 weeks. The labrum will take 8 to 12 weeks to heal, and then the actual tear, the actual tear in the rotator cuff, not where it's broke off the humeral head, the actual tear about 2 centimeters away like we talked about, that it could be anywhere from 1 to 6 months, just depending on how much it's torn. Being torn 80 to 90%, like I've discussed with Tandy Freeman, it's probably going to heal faster because it's such a high-grade tear. They're going to have to sew it back together. Well, sorry, I'm going to have to use this arm. I ain't very good at it yet, but the fibers in your tendons are kind of like fingers, and when they get torn, they're like this. But with a 90% tear, we're going to bring them back together. So naturally, if you have a slight tear, they're going to kind of come back together, like so. But with a big tear like that, we're going to get a little help from the surgeon and bring them back. So they're going to start the healing process basically immediately. Then, so with all that going into play, we're looking at a good recovery. I've also heard rotator cuff surgery is extremely painful, which I'm not looking forward to that part. But either way, thank you guys for listening. I know we were supposed to do a video over whether or not something we enjoyed, liked, or were good at, or know a lot about. I went with the last one, know a lot about, because for the last 13 days now, I have become an absolute expert on shoulders. Or rotator cuffs especially, but I've been doing a lot of research on it. It's not really that I enjoy this. There's nothing about being hurt that I enjoy, but it's something that I have devoted some of my time to, to really get ahead of the ball, I guess you could say, get ahead of the game, you know, as to what to expect, what to be ready for, and so I can have the best recovery possible. But either way, y'all have a great day. Thank you, guys.